My sister faked allergies at every important event of my life for attention. So I gave her the spotlight she wanted. My sister Jenna has this thing where she becomes deathly allergic to something new at every single important event in my life. Not actually allergic, mind you. She just needs everyone to stop what they're doing and focus on her medical emergency, which mysteriously resolves the second the attention shifts back to her. It started at my college graduation party. Everything was perfect until Jenna suddenly couldn't breathe because someone was wearing lavender perfume. She'd never been allergic to lavender in her entire life, but there she was gasping and fanning herself until my dad drove her home and missed my speech. The doctor found nothing wrong. Next was my engagement party. Halfway through dinner, Jenna discovered she was allergic to the flowers on the table. Not any specific flower, just flowers in general. She made my fiancé drive her to urgent care where they told her she was fine. She missed the rest of the party but felt good enough to go clubbing later that night. My friend saw her there dancing 3 hours after her near-death experience with carnations. At my wedding shower, she became allergic to the balloons. The latex was supposedly closing her throat even though she was 20 feet away from them. My mom had to take her outside and sit with her in the car for 2 hours. Jenna posted selfies from the car, talking about how scary allergies were while my aunt was inside giving the toast she'd prepared. The wedding was peak Jenna. During the ceremony, right when I was saying my vows, she started wheezing because she'd just developed an allergy to my bouquet. The same flowers she'd helped me pick out 3 months earlier. The officiant had to pause while my cousin took her outside. She came back in for the reception perfectly fine until the best man's speech when she suddenly couldn't handle the champagne bubbles in the air. Not drinking champagne, just the bubbles existing near her. My husband's family thought she was having a breakdown. But here's what really got me. At my baby shower, Jenna announced she was allergic to the color pink. The color. She said certain wavelengths of light triggered her histamines and all the pink decorations were making her sick. My mother-in-law, who's a nurse, just stared at her. Jenna left early but not before making sure everyone knew she was suffering for my sake by even attending. After my son was born, I started noticing patterns. Jenna's allergies only happened at my events, or our cousin's events, or anyone else's events where she wasn't the center of attention. At her own birthday parties, she could eat everything, smell everything, touch everything. Miraculous. When I won an award at work, Jenna came to the ceremony and became allergic to the carpet. The industrial carpet in the hotel ballroom was apparently off-gassing something toxic only she could detect. When our cousin got married, Jenna was allergic to the Unity candle smoke from 50 feet away. When my brother bought his first house, she was allergic to his doorbell. The sound frequency hurt her immune system. I'd had enough. My son's first birthday was coming up and I knew Jenna would ruin it with some new allergy. So I planned the most Jenna-focused party possible. I called it an allergy-friendly celebration and told everyone it was to accommodate my poor sister's medical needs. I sent out invitations listing all of Jenna's allergies from the past 5 years. No flowers, no balloons, no perfume, no candles, no pink, no purple, no patterns that could trigger seizures, no music with certain frequencies, no carpets, only Jenna-safe foods. The list was 3 pages long. Everyone received it. My husband's family, our relatives, all our friends. Everyone now had a document of Jenna's 47 different allergies. People started asking questions. How did she survive daily life? Did she live in a bubble? Was she seeing specialists? My mom called, concerned, saying she hadn't realized Jenna was so sick. Jenna was furious but couldn't say anything because that would mean admitting she'd been faking. The party was ridiculous. I decorated everything in beige and gray. The food was plain rice, unseasoned chicken, and water. No cake because Jenna had been allergic to flour at my promotion dinner, eggs at my housewarming, and sugar at my anniversary party. The music was just white noise because anything else might trigger her sound sensitivity. I made a speech about how proud I was to sacrifice my son's first birthday to keep my sister safe and healthy. I talked about each allergy incident in detail, reminding everyone how brave Jenna was for surviving being allergic to doorknobs at Christmas and throw pillows at Thanksgiving. The guests looked confused and bored. My son cried because there were no colors or fun anything. About an hour in, Jenna snapped. She pushed back from the beige folding table and stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. The white noise music kept playing its flat static sound while everyone turned to look at her. My son stopped crying for just a second, surprised by the sudden movement. Jenna's hands were shaking and her face had gone bright red. She opened her mouth and the words came out loud enough that even the people in the kitchen could hear. She wasn't allergic to anything. Not the lavender, not the flowers, not the balloons, not the pink color, none of it. The room went completely silent except for my son starting to cry again in the background. I watched her standing there with her fists clenched and her chest moving up and down fast. Years of fake emergencies were collapsing right in front of everyone. My cousin stopped mid-bite with his fork halfway to his mouth. My husband's parents looked at each other with confused faces. Jenna's eyes were filling up with tears and her whole body was trembling. She started crying hard, the kind where your shoulders shake and your face gets all twisted up. Then she was yelling at me that I was cruel, that I was a terrible sister for making her sit through this awful party just to prove some point. Her voice got louder with each word, and people started looking uncomfortable. She said I'd always been jealous of the attention she got from everyone. She pointed at the beige walls and the gray streamers and said this whole stupid setup was designed just to embarrass her in front of the entire family. Tears were running down her face and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. She said I was mean and vindictive and that I'd planned this whole thing to make her look bad. Several guests started whispering to each other and I could see them trying to figure out what was happening. My mom jumped up from her seat so fast she almost knocked over her water glass. She rushed over to Jenna and put her arms around her shoulders. Her voice was shaking when she asked Jenna what she meant by not actually allergic. The confusion on my mom's face was real because she'd spent years driving Jenna to urgent care and sitting with her in parking lots. She kept asking Jenna to explain what she was saying. Several guests were looking back and forth between me and Jenna like they were watching a tennis match. My aunt had her hand over her mouth. My dad stood up but didn't move toward either of us, just stood there looking lost. My mother-in-law was staring at Jenna with her nurse face on, the one where she's trying to figure out what's medically wrong with someone. I stayed sitting in my chair and kept my voice calm even though my heart was beating, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was holding my son against my chest and he was still crying but quieter now. I asked Jenna a simple question. Which parts weren't real? Was it the lavender at my college graduation party? Was it the flowers at my engagement dinner? Was it the champagne bubbles at my wedding reception? My voice came out steady but my hands were shaking, so bad I had to hold my son tighter to hide it. I kept my eyes on Jenna's face while I asked. I didn't yell or get upset. I just asked her to tell everyone which allergies were fake and which ones were real. My son grabbed onto my shirt with his little fist and made a sad whimpering sound. Jenna's face went from red to almost purple and she screamed at me. Actually screamed so loud that people in the back of the room jumped. She said I was a horrible sister for setting her up like this. She said she had real medical issues and I was making her sound like some kind of liar in front of everyone. Her hands were waving around while she yelled and spit was flying out of her mouth. She grabbed her purse off the table with such force that it knocked over a cup of water. The water spread across the beige tablecloth but nobody moved to clean it up. She started walking toward the door fast, almost running. My dad finally moved and tried to grab her arm to stop her, but she pulled away from him hard. She was crying and yelling at the same time, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. My mother-in-law stood up and her voice cut through all the noise. She asked Jenna a direct question in her professional nurse tone. How does someone who's allergic to 47 different things manage to function in daily life without constant medical help? She listed some of the allergies from my 3-page document. Certain light colors, doorbell frequencies, carpet off-gassing, throw pillow materials. Her tone wasn't mean, but it was pointed and sharp. She asked if Jenna carried an EpiPen or saw an allergist regularly. She asked if Jenna had been hospitalized for any of these severe reactions. Jenna stopped right at the door with her hand on the handle. She froze there like someone had hit pause on a video. Her back was to everyone and her shoulders were still shaking from crying. Winston spoke up from his seat near the food table. His voice was quiet, but everyone could hear him in the silence. He said he had something to mention. He'd seen Jenna at that club downtown on the night of my engagement party. The same night she'd gone to urgent care for her flower allergy emergency. He pulled out his phone and said he had photos from that night if anyone wanted to see them. He'd been there with some friends and had taken pictures of the group. Jenna was in the background of several shots, dancing and drinking and looking perfectly healthy. Jenna's face went completely pale, like all the blood had drained out of it. She turned around slowly and looked at Winston with wide eyes. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Her hand was still on the door handle and she looked trapped, like an animal that couldn't find a way out. My husband walked over to me and gently took our son from my arms. Our son reached for him and stopped crying almost immediately. My husband bounced him a little and made soft shushing sounds. Then he said in his calm voice that maybe everyone should sit down. Maybe we should all talk about this calmly and figure out what was going on. His parents looked completely lost, like they'd walked into the wrong party by mistake. His mom kept looking at her husband with a "what is happening" expression. His dad was staring at Jenna like he'd never seen her before. Other guests were shifting in their seats and some were checking their phones like they wanted an excuse to leave. The white noise music was still playing its flat, empty sound through the speakers. Jenna refused to sit down. She stayed standing by the door but let go of the handle. She started talking fast, listing symptoms she'd had over the years. Real symptoms that she swore were genuine. She described her throat feeling tight at my graduation party. She talked about not being able to breathe properly at my wedding. She said the feelings were real even if the causes were wrong. Her voice was desperate and she was crying harder now, her whole face red and wet. She kept saying the symptoms were real, over and over, like if she said it enough times everyone would believe her. Some of my relatives were softening toward her. I could see it in their faces. My mom was nodding along like this explanation made everything okay. My aunt looked sympathetic instead of angry. Jenna kept going, describing chest tightness and dizziness and feeling like she might pass out. I pulled out my phone and opened the notes app where I'd been keeping track for months. I started reading out loud. June 15th, my college graduation party, lavender perfume emergency. September 3rd, my engagement dinner, general flower allergy. February 20th, my wedding shower, balloon latex crisis. May 12th, my actual wedding ceremony, bouquet sensitivity. I kept reading date after date, event after event. My baby shower and the pink color wavelengths, my work award and the carpet off-gassing, my cousin's wedding and the unity candle smoke, my brother's housewarming and the doorbell frequency. Every single emergency happened during someone else's important moment. Never at Jenna's birthday parties. Never at her work events. Never on random ordinary days when nothing special was happening. The pattern was right there in black and white. Impossible to deny when you heard it all laid out in order with dates attached. People were staring at their hands or the floor or anywhere except at Jenna. The room felt smaller somehow, like the beige walls were closing in on all of us. My aunt was sitting near the back of the room, perched on one of the folding chairs I'd set up. She cleared her throat and everyone turned to look at her. She said she'd been thinking about this for a while now, wondering about some things that didn't quite add up. Her voice was quiet but steady, the kind of tone that made people lean in to listen. She brought up the wedding shower, how Jenna had needed to leave because of the balloons. My mom had taken her out to the car and stayed with her for 2 hours while the rest of us finished the party inside. My aunt said that when she went out to check on them later, right before she was supposed to give her toast, Jenna had been fine. Not just fine, but laughing at something on her phone, scrolling through messages with a smile on her face. My aunt had found it strange at the time but hadn't wanted to say anything. She'd chalked it up to allergies being unpredictable, symptoms coming and going. But now, hearing all these dates and events laid out in order, she was starting to see a pattern she couldn't ignore anymore. My cousin spoke up next, his arms crossed over his chest. He said the doorbell thing at his housewarming had been weird from the start. Jenna had been to his house 3 times before that party, had rung that exact doorbell on every visit without any problems. But during the housewarming, when everyone was gathered to celebrate his first house purchase, suddenly the sound frequency was hurting her immune system. He'd felt guilty about it at the time, like his doorbell had somehow injured his cousin. Now he realized how bizarre the whole thing sounded when you actually thought about it. Other relatives started nodding, their faces showing recognition. Someone mentioned the carpet incident at my work award ceremony. Another person brought up the unity candle at our cousin's wedding. Each person who spoke added another piece to the puzzle. Another moment where Jenna's emergency had seemed just a little too convenient, a little too perfectly timed. Jenna's face shifted, the trapped look fading into something more calculated. She uncrossed her arms and took a step away from the door. She said that maybe some of it was psychosomatic, that she had anxiety around big events and her body reacted with real physical symptoms. Her voice got stronger as she spoke, gaining confidence in this new explanation. She insisted this didn't mean she was lying about anything. The symptoms were genuine even if the causes weren't what she'd thought. She talked about how the mind and body were connected, how stress could cause physical reactions that felt exactly like allergic responses. She said she'd read articles about how anxiety could make your throat feel tight or your skin feel itchy. She wasn't faking. She was just experiencing psychosomatic symptoms triggered by the stress of being at important events. Her hands moved as she talked, gesturing to emphasize her points, and I could see her rebuilding her defense in real time. My mom latched onto this explanation like a lifeline. She jumped in before anyone else could respond, saying that anxiety was a real medical condition. She looked around the room at everyone, her eyes pleading for understanding. She said we should all be more supportive, that mental health was just as important as physical health. She started talking about how much pressure Jenna must have been under all these years, how hard it must have been to deal with these symptoms without proper support. I watched her reframe the entire situation, turning Jenna from manipulator into victim in the span of 30 seconds. She was doing what she'd always done, finding a way to excuse Jenna's behavior, to make it everyone else's responsibility to accommodate her. My dad was nodding along, his face softening as he looked at Jenna with concern instead of disappointment. I put my phone down on the table next to me. I said that Jenna never had these anxiety reactions at her own birthday parties. She'd celebrated her 25th birthday at a restaurant with 40 people and handled it fine. She'd had her own graduation party without a single breathing problem. Last year, she'd gotten a promotion at work and thrown a celebration dinner where she'd been the center of attention all night, eating everything, drinking champagne, surrounded by flowers and candles. If it were truly anxiety about big events, it wouldn't be so selective about which events triggered it. The symptoms only appeared at other people's important moments, never at her own. That wasn't anxiety. That was a choice. My voice stayed level, but I could feel anger building in my chest, hot and tight. My husband's parents shifted in their seats near the front of the room. His mom picked up her purse from the floor beside her chair. His dad stood up and started buttoning his jacket, both of them clearly wanting to escape this family drama that had nothing to do with them. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, the kind married couples share when they're trying to communicate without words. My husband saw them preparing to leave and quietly asked them to stay. He said this was important, and he wanted them to understand what his wife had been dealing with for years. He said it in his calm way that made requests sound reasonable instead of demanding. His parents sat back down slowly, his mom clutching her purse in her lap like a shield, but they stayed. Jenna's expression changed again. The anxiety explanation abandoned as quickly as she'd grabbed onto it. Her face flushed red and her voice got loud. She said I was vindictive and cruel, that I'd ruined my own son's birthday just to humiliate her in front of everyone. She pointed at me while she talked, her finger shaking. She said a good sister would have talked to her privately instead of staging this public intervention. She said I'd planned this whole thing to embarrass her, to make her look bad in front of the family and my husband's parents. She was right about that part. I had planned it. But she was acting like the planning was the problem instead of the years of fake emergencies that made the planning necessary. I reminded her that I tried talking to her privately 3 years ago. After the wedding shower, when she'd interrupted my aunt's toast with her balloon emergency, I'd called her the next day. I'd asked her gently if maybe she was having anxiety or if something else was going on. She'd told me I was being paranoid and unsupportive of her health struggles. She'd made me feel guilty for even questioning her, like I was a bad sister for not believing her symptoms were real. She'd cried on the phone and said she couldn't believe I would accuse her of lying about her medical issues. So yes, I'd stopped trying the private approach because the private approach had gotten me nowhere except feeling like a terrible person for having legitimate concerns. My dad finally spoke up, his voice heavy in a way I'd never heard before. He asked Jenna directly if she'd been faking all of it, not with anger, but with disappointment that somehow felt worse. He just wanted a straight answer after years of driving her to doctors and leaving events early and worrying about her health. Jenna looked at him with tears streaming down her face. She said it was more complicated than just faking. She said she needed the attention because she felt invisible. The words came out between sobs, her whole body shaking. She said she felt like nobody noticed her unless something was wrong, like she had to create emergencies to matter to anyone. The room went silent again except for Jenna's crying, and the white noise still playing through the speakers. I felt vindicated and sad at the same time, two emotions fighting each other in my chest. She'd admitted it finally, but the admission didn't feel as satisfying as I'd thought it would. My son had stopped crying and was staring at everyone with big, confused eyes from my husband's arms. He looked around at all the adults with serious faces and tears, probably wondering why his birthday party felt so wrong. I realized I'd turned his first birthday into a therapy session, that I'd sacrificed his actual celebration to prove a point about his aunt's behavior. Lydia Harden stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the beige wall and spoke in a calm voice that cut through the tension. She told Jenna that she worked in mental health and had been listening to everything, and this sounded like something that might really benefit from professional help. She said it gently, not like an accusation, but like she genuinely wanted to help. She offered to share some therapist recommendations with Jenna after things calmed down, said there were people who specialized in this kind of attention-seeking behavior and the underlying issues that caused it. Jenna looked at her with red, swollen eyes but didn't argue or get defensive. She just nodded slightly and wiped her face with the back of her hand. My mom started crying then too, these quiet sobs that made her shoulders shake. She said she didn't understand how this happened or why Jenna felt invisible when she'd always been loved. Her voice cracked on the word loved, and my dad immediately put his arm around her. He looked older suddenly, more tired than I'd ever seen him. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, and his face had this gray quality to it, like the weight of everything was physically pressing down on him. He didn't say anything, just held my mom while she cried, and stared at Jenna with this expression that was part confusion and part sadness. Jenna watched them for a moment, then walked slowly to one of the beige folding chairs and sat down heavily. The chair made a scraping sound against the floor that seemed too loud in the quiet room. She put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, taking several deep breaths before she started talking again. She admitted that it started small at my graduation party, that she'd felt left out and forgotten while everyone focused on me. She said when she pretended to have trouble breathing, everyone suddenly cared about her, asked if she was okay, made her the center of attention. Then it became a pattern she couldn't stop. Each time she did it, it got easier to fake and harder to resist doing it again. She said she knew it was wrong, but in those moments when everyone was celebrating someone else, she felt like she was disappearing, and the only way to matter was to create an emergency. My hands were shaking as I listened to her describe this pattern so casually, like it was just something that happened instead of something she actively chose to do over and over. I asked her why she couldn't just be happy for other people, why every important moment in my life had to become about her crisis. My voice cracked on the last word because I was thinking about my wedding vows being interrupted, about the officiant having to pause while everyone turned to look at Jenna wheezing in the third row. I thought about my baby shower and the color pink making her sick, about my aunt's toast that nobody heard because Jenna was having her balloon emergency in the parking lot. Years of memories were tainted now, colored by her fake emergencies and the knowledge that she'd done it all deliberately. Every single important day had this shadow over it, because Jenna needed to be the star of someone else's show. Jenna lifted her face from her hands and looked at me directly. She said she knew it was wrong, but she felt like she was disappearing, like everyone only paid attention to her when something was wrong with her. She was sobbing into her hands now, her whole body shaking with these big, gasping cries that made her sound like a little kid. Despite everything, despite all the ruined moments and fake emergencies and years of manipulation, I felt a pang of sympathy for how broken she looked sitting there on that stupid beige chair. She looked small and pathetic, and genuinely miserable in a way that was different from her fake medical emergencies. My husband's mother cleared her throat quietly and suggested that maybe the rest of the guests should leave and let the immediate family work this out privately. She said it diplomatically, like she was offering us a gift rather than trying to escape an uncomfortable situation. Several people nodded gratefully and immediately started gathering their things, picking up purses and checking for phones, clearly relieved to have permission to leave. My cousin was already heading for the door before she even finished talking. I thanked everyone for coming and apologized for the drama, feeling my face get hot with embarrassment. My revenge plan had spiraled into this emotional confrontation that was way bigger than I'd intended. I'd wanted to expose Jenna's pattern, not create a full family therapy session in front of my husband's parents and half our relatives. My husband squeezed my shoulder supportively as we stood by the door saying goodbye to confused relatives and friends who didn't quite know what to say. They mumbled things like take care and hope everything works out while avoiding eye contact. Once only immediate family remained, the room felt bigger and emptier. My mom wiped her eyes and suggested we reschedule a proper birthday party for my son next weekend, one that was actually fun with colors and cake and music that wasn't white noise. She looked at me with pleading eyes, wanting to fix this and make it right, wanting to give my son the celebration he deserved. I agreed but said that Jenna needed to commit to therapy before she was invited to any more family events. My voice was firm when I said it because I meant it completely. I told her I couldn't keep wondering if she'd sabotage the next important moment, couldn't spend every celebration waiting for her next fake emergency. My dad nodded in agreement, looking at Jenna with this mixture of love and disappointment that made his face look even more tired. Jenna agreed to find a therapist, still crying but seeming genuinely sorry now that everything was out in the open. She apologized to me directly, saying she was sorry for ruining so many important days. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her right away, that she knew trust took time to rebuild and she'd destroyed a lot of it. My husband scooped up our son and headed toward the kitchen, murmuring something about finding a cupcake he'd hidden away just in case. The door swung shut behind them, leaving me standing in this beige nightmare with my parents and Jenna. I looked around at the gray streamers, the tan tablecloths, the boring food sitting untouched on paper plates. It all looked so stupid now, so over the top, and I felt this weird urge to laugh at myself for going this far just to make a point. My mom was still wiping her eyes and Jenna had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. My dad stood between them looking lost, like he didn't know which daughter to comfort first. My mom turned to me and asked how long I'd been planning this whole thing. Her voice was quiet and hurt, and I could see she was trying to understand when I'd decided to do something this big without telling her. I sat down on one of the folding chairs and admitted I'd been keeping notes for months, writing down every single fake emergency with dates and details. I told her the 3-page allergy list wasn't made up. It was just everything Jenna had claimed over 5 years all written out in one place. My mom's face did this crumpling thing, and she asked why I didn't come to her first, why I didn't talk to her about what I was seeing. The hurt in her voice made my stomach twist. I explained that I did try to talk to her about it years ago, right after the wedding shower incident with the balloons. I reminded her how I'd brought it up during lunch one day, mentioned that Jenna's allergies seemed to only happen at other people's events, and she'd shut me down completely. She'd told me I was being unsupportive, that Jenna was suffering and I should be more understanding of her health struggles. My mom looked at me with these wide eyes, like she was trying to remember that conversation, and then her whole face just fell apart as the memory came back. She started crying harder and said she'd been so worried about protecting Jenna that she hadn't seen what was actually happening. She kept saying she was sorry, that she should have listened to me, that she'd made me feel like I couldn't tell her the truth. My dad cleared his throat and said they needed to have some serious family conversations about why Jenna felt the need to act this way. He looked at Jenna when he said it, and his face was sad but also disappointed in a way I'd never seen before. He told me he was sorry for all the moments that got ruined, for missing my graduation speech and not seeing the pattern earlier. He said he'd been so focused on getting Jenna to doctors and urgent care that he never stopped to ask why these emergencies only happened at certain times. Jenna lifted her head from her hands and looked at him with red, swollen eyes. She started to say something, but he held up his hand and told her they'd talk about it more later, that right now he needed to apologize to me for not protecting my important moments. Jenna wiped her face with her sleeve and asked me in this small voice if we could start over. She wanted to know if there was any way to rebuild trust between us, if I could ever forgive her for what she'd done. I looked at her sitting there in her chair, looking smaller and younger than usual, and I told her the truth. I said I didn't know if we could rebuild trust, that it would take a really long time and she'd destroyed a lot of it over the years. I reminded her about my wedding vows being interrupted, my baby shower being ruined, my work award ceremony being overshadowed by carpet allergies. Every single important moment I'd had in the past 5 years had a Jenna emergency attached to it, and I couldn't just forget that because she finally admitted the truth. My mom suggested we all try family therapy together, that this clearly went deeper than just fake allergies. She pulled out her phone right there and started searching for therapists who did family sessions. My dad nodded and said that was a good idea, that we needed professional help to work through this because it was too big for us to handle on our own. Jenna agreed immediately, saying she'd go to therapy as many times as we needed. Within 10 minutes, my mom had found someone who could see us the following week and was filling out an online form to request an appointment. I watched her type quickly, her hands shaking a little, and felt this weird mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. The next day, I threw together a real birthday party for my son. I bought bright blue and yellow decorations at the store, ordered a cake with cartoon characters on it, and invited my husband's family back over. I texted everyone saying we were doing a do-over party, a proper celebration this time. My husband's parents showed up with more presents and acted like yesterday's disaster had never happened, though I could tell they were being extra careful with their words. His mom asked if I needed help setting up, and his dad played with my son while I hung streamers. The party was actually fun this time, with music playing and colorful balloons everywhere and cake that tasted good. My son laughed and smashed frosting all over his face, and everyone took pictures and acted normal. Jenna didn't come to the do-over party. I texted her the details, but she wrote back saying she thought it was better if she stayed home, that everyone needed space from her right now. Part of me felt relieved because I could just enjoy the party without waiting for her next move. But another part of me felt sad that my sister wasn't there for my son's actual birthday celebration. I caught myself checking my phone during the party, wondering if she was okay, and then got mad at myself for still worrying about her after everything she'd put me through. She'd ruined so many events, and now I was feeling guilty that she wasn't at this one, which made no sense at all. That night, after everyone left and my son was asleep, my husband told me his parents had asked him if my family was always this dramatic. He said it in this careful way, like he didn't want to upset me but needed to be honest. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment and asked what he'd told them. He said he'd defended us, but admitted this was extreme even by our family's standards, that usually we just had normal arguments at Thanksgiving like everyone else. I told him I was sorry his parents had to see all that I'd probably taken my revenge plan too far. He hugged me and said he understood why I'd done it, that he'd watched Jenna ruin our wedding and knew how frustrated I'd been for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Winston. He said half the family was texting him asking what really happened at the party, wanting to know if the rumors were true that Jenna had admitted to faking. People were confused because they'd all received the 3-page allergy list, and now they were hearing she'd confessed to making it all up. I wrote back and asked him to tell people the truth, that Jenna had admitted she'd been faking allergies for attention, and we were working on it as a family. I said we were starting therapy next week and trying to deal with it the right way. He sent back a thumbs up and said he'd spread the word, that people deserved to know what actually happened after getting that crazy allergy list in the mail. The family therapy session happened the following Tuesday, in a small office that smelled like lavender air freshener. We all sat on a gray couch that was too small for 4 adults, with me pressed against the armrest and Jenna on the opposite end. The therapist was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Reyes, who had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense way of speaking that made me think she'd heard every excuse in the book. She started by asking each of us to describe what brought us there, and my mom immediately jumped in with a long explanation about how we were a close family going through a rough patch. Jenna cried through most of the session, dabbing at her eyes with tissues and saying she didn't mean to hurt anyone. My mom got defensive when Dr. Reyes gently pointed out that making excuses for Jenna's behavior might have helped it continue for so long. She kept saying things like, "But Jenna's always been sensitive," and "I was just trying to keep the peace." My dad sat quiet in the corner chair he'd claimed, processing everything with this sad, confused look on his face. He kept glancing between Jenna and me like he was trying to figure out where everything went wrong. When Dr. Reyes asked him directly what he thought about the situation, he just said he loved both his daughters and didn't know how to fix this. The session lasted an hour and felt like 3, with long silences broken by Jenna's crying or my mom's defensive explanations. By the end, Dr. Reyes said she thought we had a lot of work to do, but that she was glad we were there. She scheduled us for another session in 2 weeks. Dr. Reyes spent the second session helping us understand that Jenna's behavior likely came from deeper problems with feeling invisible and needing attention. She said attention-seeking patterns like this usually develop over years, not overnight, and that meant there were probably family dynamics we all needed to look at. Jenna got individual homework assignments, like keeping a journal about times she felt the urge to create drama and what she was really feeling in those moments. The therapist also suggested my parents examine their own relationship and how they handled conflict, which made my mom shift uncomfortably in her seat. She asked if they ever fought in front of us kids, or if they always tried to present a united front. My dad admitted they usually swept problems under the rug to avoid confrontation, and Dr. Reyes nodded like that explained something important. She talked about how kids learn to get attention based on what works in their family system, and if being dramatic was the only way to get noticed, then that becomes the pattern. I sat there feeling weird about analyzing my whole childhood like this, but also understanding things I'd never put together before. The session ended with Dr. Reyes telling Jenna she needed to see her own therapist twice a week, not just come to family sessions. Jenna agreed without arguing, which surprised me. Over the next few weeks, Jenna actually went to her therapy appointments and seemed to take them seriously. She texted me occasionally with small apologies for specific things, like the time she ruined my work award ceremony or when she faked being allergic to my wedding bouquet. The texts weren't asking for forgiveness or trying to start long conversations, just acknowledging what she'd done wrong. One text said, "I'm sorry I made your engagement party about me. That was your night and I took it from you." Another said, "I know saying sorry doesn't fix the doorbell thing at our brother's house. That was ridiculous and I embarrassed everyone." I didn't always respond right away because I wasn't sure what to say, but I kept the texts saved on my phone. My husband noticed I was checking my phone more often and asked if everything was okay. I showed him the messages and he said it seemed like real progress, that Jenna was taking responsibility instead of making excuses. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine change, but another part kept waiting for her to slip back into old patterns. I caught myself being suspicious of every text, wondering if there was some hidden agenda, or if she was building up to asking for something. But the texts kept coming every few days, always short and specific, never dramatic or asking for anything back. My mom called me late one Thursday night, crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She kept apologizing for not believing me sooner, for all the years she'd made excuses for Jenna instead of seeing the pattern. Her voice was shaky and broken, and she said the family therapist had helped her see how she'd prioritized keeping peace over dealing with real problems. She told me she'd always known something was off about Jenna's allergies, but convinced herself it was easier to just go along with it than cause conflict. She said she was sorry for all the times she'd made me feel like I was being mean or unsupportive when I tried to point out what Jenna was doing. The conversation lasted almost an hour, with her crying and talking about specific incidents she now saw differently. She brought up my wedding and how she'd rushed to help Jenna during my vows instead of telling her to wait until after the ceremony. She mentioned my baby shower and how she'd actually felt relieved when Jenna left early because it meant no more drama, but then felt guilty for feeling that way. I listened to her pour everything out, feeling my own throat get tight with emotion. When she finally stopped talking, there was this long silence on the phone where we were both just breathing and trying not to cry harder. I told my mom I forgave her, that I understood she was trying to protect both her daughters in the only way she knew how. I explained that I didn't blame her for Jenna's behavior, that Jenna was an adult who made her own choices, but I also said I was glad she could finally see what had been happening, because it had made me feel crazy for years. We talked about how she'd always treated Jenna like she was fragile, like she needed extra protection and care, and how that probably made things worse. My mom admitted she'd been scared that if she pushed Jenna too hard or called her out, Jenna would fall apart completely. I said that by protecting Jenna from consequences, she'd actually kept her from growing up and learning to handle her feelings in healthy ways. The conversation went deeper than any we'd had in years, maybe ever. We talked about how I'd always been the responsible one, the kid who didn't need attention or cause problems, and how that meant I got less focus even when I needed support. My mom cried again and said she'd taken me for granted, assumed I was fine because I never made a fuss. I told her I loved her and that we could work on building something better now. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight, and I felt exhausted, but also lighter somehow. Something had shifted between us, like we'd finally said things that needed to be said for a long time. Thanksgiving came 2 months after the birthday party disaster, and I spent the whole week before it, feeling anxious about having Jenna there. My husband kept telling me it would be fine, that Jenna was working on herself, and we should give her a chance. I cooked for days, making turkey and stuffing and 3 different pies, partly because I wanted everything to be perfect, and partly because staying busy kept me from thinking too much. Jenna showed up right on time carrying a green bean casserole she'd made herself, which shocked me because she never brought anything to family events before. She complimented my decorations and asked if she could help set the table. Throughout dinner, she stayed quiet and helpful, passing dishes and refilling water glasses without being asked. She didn't mention any allergies or health problems or create any drama at all. She ate everything I served, including the stuffing that had onions in it and the pie with nuts on top. When my son knocked over his sippy cup and juice went everywhere, Jenna jumped up to help clean it before I even moved. She left around 7, saying she had plans with friends, but thanking me for having her and telling me the food was great. No fake emergencies, no sudden symptoms, no attention-seeking behavior. After she left, my husband and I looked at each other in disbelief. The whole evening had been completely normal. My cousin found me in the kitchen after Jenna left, helping me put leftovers away. He said he wanted to thank me for finally saying something about Jenna's behavior, that he'd been bothered by it for years but was afraid to bring it up. He mentioned his wedding and how Jenna's fake allergy to the Unity candle had made his wife upset, but they'd felt like they couldn't complain because it was a medical issue. He said other relatives had been texting him after the birthday party, expressing similar relief that someone had finally addressed the pattern. My aunt came in while we were talking and added that she'd been hurt when Jenna's balloon emergency interrupted her toast at my wedding shower, but she'd felt guilty for being upset about it. She said she'd practiced that toast for weeks and never got to finish it properly. We stood there in my kitchen talking about all the ways Jenna's fake allergies had affected everyone, and I realized the damage had been way bigger than just my ruined events. She'd hurt the whole family with her behavior, making everyone feel like they couldn't be honest about their feelings because they'd look like terrible people for doubting someone's medical problems. My cousin hugged me before he left and said our family felt healthier already, that there was less tension at gatherings now. Other relatives said similar things as they headed out, thanking me quietly for forcing the confrontation even though it had been uncomfortable. Jenna started a new job in early December working at a marketing company downtown. She texted me asking if I wanted to meet for coffee, and I agreed even though I felt nervous about it. We met at a place halfway between our houses on a Saturday morning when my husband could watch our son. Jenna looked different somehow, more put together and less dramatic in her appearance. She told me about her new job with genuine excitement, describing her projects and coworkers in detail. She mentioned that her therapist was helping her find healthier ways to get attention and validation, like doing good work and building real friendships instead of creating crises. She talked about learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately acting out to make them stop. I listened and drank my coffee and tried to figure out if this was real or just another performance. But she kept bringing the conversation back to asking about me, about my son and my work, and how I was handling everything. She didn't make the whole coffee date about herself, which was completely different from how she usually acted. We sat there for almost 2 hours just talking like normal sisters, and it felt strange but also kind of nice. I told Jenna some of my own struggles during that coffee meeting, stuff I'd never shared with her before. I explained how I'd always felt like I had to be the responsible one, the kid who had everything together while she got to be dramatic and get coddled. I said it had made me feel invisible sometimes, like my achievements didn't matter as much because they didn't come with emergencies attached. I told her about times I'd needed support but didn't ask for it because I didn't want to add to the family drama. Jenna listened without interrupting or getting defensive, which felt like real progress. She didn't try to make excuses or explain away what I was feeling. When I finished talking, she just said she was sorry, and that she was starting to understand how her behavior had affected everyone around her. She said her therapist was helping her see that other people had feelings and needs too, not just her. We talked about our childhood and how different our experiences had been even though we grew up in the same house. She admitted she'd felt like she had to compete for attention because I was naturally good at everything, and I told her I'd felt like I couldn't mess up because she already took up all the crisis space. It was honest in a way we'd never been before. My husband commented later that week that family gatherings felt noticeably calmer now, that there was less tension in the air. He said he used to brace himself before every family event, waiting to see what Jenna would do this time. But Thanksgiving had been completely normal, and he'd actually enjoyed himself instead of staying on alert. He mentioned that his parents had warmed back up to my family after seeing we were actively working on our problems. They'd been pretty cold after the birthday party disaster, but when I called his mom to apologize again for the drama, she'd been understanding. She said every family has issues, and what mattered was that we were dealing with ours instead of pretending they didn't exist. My husband said his dad had even joked about coming to Christmas at my parents' house, which was huge because he'd been avoiding our family gatherings since the wedding. I felt grateful that my in-laws were giving us another chance, that they could see we were trying to be healthier. My husband hugged me and said he was proud of how I'd handled everything, that it took courage to confront Jenna the way I did even if my method was extreme. Christmas came and my parents hosted their usual dinner at their house with the extended family crowding around the table. Jenna showed up on time carrying a stack of wrapped presents and a red envelope with my name written across the front in her handwriting. She handed it to me quietly, while everyone else was busy setting up the food, not making a big production out of it like she would have done before. I opened it later in the bathroom away from everyone else and read the card she'd picked out, something simple with snowflakes on the front. Inside, she'd written several paragraphs in her small, neat script about how sorry she was for everything, how the birthday party confrontation had been the worst moment of her life, but also maybe the most important one. She wrote that she'd needed someone to stop enabling her behavior, and while my method had been really harsh and embarrassing, it pushed her to finally get help. She thanked me for caring enough to force the issue, even though it meant ruining my son's party and making everyone uncomfortable. The words felt genuine, and I folded the card back up and stuck it in my pocket, feeling a weird mix of relief and sadness. When I came back out to the living room, Jenna was helping my mom carry dishes to the table and laughing at something my dad said, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. The months passed, and my son's second birthday came around faster than I expected. This time, I planned an actual fun party with bright balloons and streamers in primary colors, a big cake shaped like a truck, because he was obsessed with vehicles and music that wasn't just white noise. Jenna texted me the week before asking if she could come early to help set up, and I said yes, curious to see if she'd actually follow through. She showed up an hour before the party started wearing jeans and a t-shirt ready to work, carrying a wrapped present that looked age-appropriate instead of something weird or over the top. We hung decorations together in my backyard, and she asked me questions about my son's current interests and what games the other kids might like. She tied balloon ribbons to the fence posts and helped me arrange the food table without once mentioning anything about herself or creating any kind of drama. When the guests started arriving, Jenna greeted people normally and made small talk with my husband's parents, who seemed pleasantly surprised by how calm she was. She stayed the entire party, played with my son and the other kids, helped clean up spilled juice, and left at the end with everyone else after saying genuine goodbyes. No fake allergies, no medical emergencies, no sudden need to be the center of attention. It was so normal it almost felt strange. My mom pulled me aside near the end of the party while Jenna was helping my husband pack up leftover cake. She had tears in her eyes when she told me she was proud of both her daughters and how much we'd both grown over the past year. She said our family felt healthier now, even though the process of getting here had been really painful and hard. I hugged her and felt actually close to her for the first time in what seemed like forever. Not that fake closeness where we pretended everything was fine, but real connection based on honesty. She admitted she'd been in denial about Jenna's behavior for years, because it was easier than confronting the problem, and she was grateful I'd forced everyone to deal with it, even though my method was extreme. We stood there in my backyard watching my son play with his new toys, and I felt like maybe we were finally becoming the family we'd always pretended to be. Over the next several months, Jenna and I started building a different kind of relationship that felt more real than what we'd had before. We weren't suddenly best friends who told each other everything, but we could have actual conversations now without me waiting for her to twist things around and make everything about herself. We met for coffee sometimes and talked about normal stuff like work and dating and what shows we were watching. She asked me questions about my life and actually listened to the answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. I started trusting her a little bit more each time she showed up and acted like a regular person, instead of creating some dramatic scene. It was slow progress, but it felt genuine in a way our old relationship never had. I could tell she was working hard in therapy because she'd catch herself sometimes when she started falling into old patterns and actually correct her behavior instead of doubling down. In one of our family therapy sessions, the therapist asked us to talk about how Jenna's fake allergy pattern had affected everyone in the family, not just me. My cousin spoke up about his housewarming party and how confused he'd been when Jenna claimed his doorbell was making her sick, how he'd felt guilty and worried even though it made no sense. My aunt talked about the wedding shower and how hurt she'd been that her toast got interrupted, how she'd spent weeks preparing what she wanted to say and never got to finish it. One by one, different family members shared their experiences, and Jenna sat there listening to all of it, hearing for the first time how her behavior had created this ripple effect through everyone's lives. She didn't get defensive or try to make excuses, just listened with tears running down her face as people explained how her fake emergencies had affected them. The therapist pointed out that this kind of listening without defending herself showed real progress in her treatment. Later in that same session, Jenna took full responsibility for everything, without trying to minimize what she'd done or ask anyone to feel sorry for her. She acknowledged that she'd been selfish and manipulative and had hurt people she cared about because she was too caught up in her own need for attention. The therapist made a note about how significant this was, how many people in Jenna's situation would try to make excuses or shift blame, but Jenna was owning her behavior completely. My dad started crying at that point, which I'd never seen him do before, and told Jenna he loved her and was proud of the work she was doing to change. He said he was sorry he hadn't seen what was happening sooner and hadn't helped her get treatment years ago. We all sat there in that therapist's office feeling raw and emotional, but also like we were finally dealing with real issues, instead of pretending everything was fine. Summer came and my husband and I decided to host a casual backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers and hot dogs and some lawn games. Jenna asked if she could bring her new boyfriend and I said yes, curious to meet the guy she'd been dating for a few months. They showed up together and he seemed nice and normal, the kind of stable guy I'd never seen her with before. She introduced him to everyone without any drama or need to make herself the center of attention, just casual introductions like any normal person would do. I watched them throughout the afternoon and noticed how he was kind to her, but didn't baby her or treat her like she was fragile. They played cornhole with some other guests, and Jenna laughed at his terrible aim, and he teased her back, and it all seemed healthy and balanced. I realized while watching them that she was actually changing, that this wasn't just an act she was putting on for the family. At one point during the barbecue, Jenna's boyfriend mentioned to me and my husband that Jenna had told him early in their relationship about her past attention-seeking behavior and her therapy work. He said she'd been really honest about her struggles and what she was working on, which he appreciated because it showed she was serious about changing. I felt impressed by how transparent she was being with him, letting herself be vulnerable in a healthy way, instead of hiding her problems or making up dramatic stories. He told us he'd seen real growth in her over the months they'd been together, and that he respected how hard she was working on herself. It made me hopeful that maybe Jenna was building a life based on honesty, instead of the fake drama she'd relied on for so long. My mother-in-law, the nurse who'd questioned Jenna's color allergy at my baby shower, ended up having a long, friendly conversation with Jenna about her therapy progress. I watched them talking by the grill and saw my mother-in-law nodding and smiling, seeming genuinely interested in what Jenna was saying. After Jenna and her boyfriend left, my mother-in-law pulled me aside and said she could see real change in Jenna. She seemed more grounded and self-aware than before. She told me our family had handled a difficult situation well, and that confronting the problem instead of ignoring it had been the right choice, even though it was messy and uncomfortable. She said her own family had similar issues they'd never addressed, and she admired that we were willing to do the hard work of actually fixing our problems. I realized sometime after that barbecue that I didn't feel anxious before family events anymore, that I wasn't constantly bracing myself for whatever crisis Jenna would create. The relief of that absence hit me hard one day when I was driving to my parents' house for a regular Sunday dinner, and noticed I felt calm instead of tense. I'd been spending so much mental and emotional energy for years trying to manage Jenna's behavior, preparing for her next dramatic moment, protecting my important events from her interference. Now that energy was freed up and I could actually enjoy family gatherings instead of dreading them, I understood how exhausting it had been to constantly be on guard, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The absence of that stress felt almost physical, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. A few months after the barbecue, my phone rang while I was making lunch. Jenna's name popped up on the screen and I felt that old familiar tension in my shoulders, but I answered anyway. She sounded different right away. Excited but not manic. Happy but not performing. She told me she got promoted at work to team lead, that her boss said she'd been doing great work and showing real leadership skills. I congratulated her and meant it, feeling genuinely happy for her success. Then she did something that caught me completely off guard. She asked about my son, wanted to know what new words he was saying and if he was still obsessed with trucks. She asked about my job too, if that difficult project I'd mentioned last month had worked out okay. The conversation flowed back and forth naturally, neither of us competing for attention or trying to one-up the other. We talked for 20 minutes about normal sister stuff, sharing updates and actually listening to each other's answers. When we hung up, I sat there holding my phone and realized that was the first conversation we'd had in years, where she didn't make everything circle back to her drama or her problems. It felt strange and good at the same time, like finding something I'd lost so long ago I'd forgotten I was missing it. My parents' anniversary dinner happened a month later at their favorite restaurant. The whole family gathered around a long table and Jenna showed up on time with her boyfriend, looking relaxed and happy. After we'd all eaten and the waiters cleared our plates, Jenna stood up and tapped her glass to get everyone's attention. My stomach tightened because old habits die hard, but she smiled at our parents and started talking about how grateful she was for their support through her therapy journey. She said the past year had been the hardest of her life, that facing her behavior and working to change it required constant effort and honesty. Then she looked around the table at all of us and admitted she'd put everyone through hell for years, that her fake emergencies and constant need for attention had damaged relationships and stolen moments that should have been special for other people. Her voice cracked a little when she turned to me specifically and thanked me for caring enough to force the confrontation at my son's birthday party, even though it was brutal and humiliating. She said sometimes the people who love you most have to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing, and she was grateful I'd been brave enough to stop enabling her. My mom was crying by then, and my dad had his arm around her shoulders. After Jenna sat down, my son came running over from where he'd been playing with some crayons the restaurant gave him. He was 2.5 now, all energy and curiosity, and he ran straight between me and Jenna like he couldn't decide whose lap to climb into. Jenna scooped him up before I could react and started making silly faces at him, getting him to giggle and grab at her earrings. I watched them together and saw how natural she was with him, how she played with him without making it about getting attention from the adults watching. She asked him questions about his drawings and listened to his toddler babbling like it was the most interesting conversation in the world. My son wrapped his little arms around her neck and gave her a sloppy kiss on the cheek, and Jenna laughed and hugged him back. I felt something shift inside me as I watched them, a careful kind of hope that maybe our family could actually be okay. We'd never be perfect, probably never stop having complicated dynamics and old wounds that ached sometimes. But sitting there at that anniversary dinner, watching my sister play with my son while my parents smiled at each other across the table, I thought maybe we were building something healthier than what we'd had before. The work wasn't finished and probably never would be completely, but we were so much better than we'd been 2 years ago when everything exploded at that beige birthday party. That had to count for something.